Hello, everyone. It is our pleasure today to record a webinar on the healthcare and medical device sectors in China. My name is Ran. I'm from CBBC Healthcare Sector, and here's my colleague Emma. She's also in charge of the healthcare sector in CBBC. So this is a brief introduction of CBBC and what we do. The China Britain Business Council, so short for CBBC, it's an organization that's based both in the UK and China. We provide services to the UK companies that are operating in China or willing to enter in the Chinese market. So these are the services we provide: business support service, BSS, event management service, and as well as launchpad service. So for more details, you can visit our website. So let's start today's webinar. Today, we're going to cover 5 aspects: the healthcare sector overview, medical device sector overview, recent policy trends in both healthcare and medical device sectors, and main opportunities and challenges, and our suggestions to EU SMEs that are operating in China or willing to enter the Chinese market. So first part, let's look at the healthcare sector in general. So we know that with the opening up and reform of the Chinese society in the 1980s, there are a lot of changes in the Chinese society, especially when the population and society in general are growing richer. So we generally observe 3 major demographic changes. The first one is an increasing life expectancy. So in general, Chinese people are living longer than before. So life standards and life expectancy have changed since 1978. The average life expectancy in 2016 in China was around 76 years. So this is ranking number 7th in Asia. World average at the same time was around 71. So China was well above the average. And according to a document published by the Chinese government in 2016 called Healthy China 2030, the life expectancy target to be reached by 2030 was 79 years. And Healthy China 2030 is a document, as a series of policy and expectations that outline the healthcare targets to be achieved by 2030. The second major demographic change we observe is that Chinese people in general are suffering from higher risks of chronic and non-communicable disease. These diseases are what we call lifestyle diseases. They are more common in today's Chinese society. So Chinese residents have higher risks of having diabetes, hypertension, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, compared with our residents, with our neighbors in Japan, also, as well as residents in the USA. So below we can see a table. This is a comparison of the percentage of population having the 3 diseases. So we can see among all, Chinese population are having a higher risks of having diabetes as well as hypertension. And the third major trend in the Chinese population is that we see that the population is aging. The Chinese society is aging very quickly. In 2016, around 230 million people were above 60. So this was 16% of the total population. And among this population, around 150 million people were aged 55 and above. And again, this was around 10% of the population. So today, as of 2015, China's old age dependency ratio stood at 13. So here I have to explain a little bit what is old age dependency ratio. This is a very important indicator of how much money the government is likely to spend in the future to take care of the elderly people. So the higher this number is, the more money is going to be spent on taking care of the elderly. So by 2045, China's old age dependency ratio is expected to reach 43. So this is already very high compared to today's level around 13. So 43 is going to equal to Japan's current level. South Korea and Japan and China are expected to be the top 3 aged country in Asia in the second half of this century. So this is going to provide a lot of opportunities to EU SMEs that are specialized in providing service to providing elderly care services. And the next section, we're going to examine the healthcare providers in China. Healthcare providers basically are referring to hospitals. So private or public hospitals, clinics, and hospitals in China are categorized into a three-tier class system according to their size and capabilities. First, the Class 1 hospitals. Class 1 hospitals are actually the smallest, most basic community hospitals. They usually have less than 100 beds, and they usually provide such as the vaccination or healthcare education services to people within the community. At the second tier, we have Class 2 hospitals. Class 2 hospitals usually have 100 to 500 beds, and they provide comprehensive treatment, disease prevention, rehabilitation services to people in their region. Class 2 hospitals also receive transferred patients from Class 1 hospitals. And then we have the Class 3 hospitals. Class 3 hospitals are the most comprehensive and largest hospitals among all. They usually have more than 500 beds, and they are the largest in terms of size, number of healthcare practitioners, expertise, and government subsidies. And they can provide comprehensive and high-quality healthcare services to all. Sometimes they also conduct academic research. So this is an introduction of the Chinese hospital system. And now we examine healthcare providers more in detail. So on the right side, in yellow, this is the hospitals divided by class. So we can see there's class 1, class 2, class 3, and also unclassified. So in general, class 1 and class 2 hospitals greatly outnumber the class 3 hospitals in numbers. And we can see class 1 hospitals is also growing very fast. From 2015 to 2016, there were 1,000 more new class 1 hospitals. So on the right side in blue, we're going to see the hospitals divided in terms of ownership. So there's public hospitals and private hospitals. So currently we can see private hospitals are more in number than public hospitals, and also private hospitals are growing very fast. So from 2015 to 2016, there were almost 2,000 more private hospitals than and public hospitals are actually decreasing in numbers. So this is actually what the Chinese government is trying to promote. In the 13th five-year plan, the Chinese government is aiming to gradually introduce more measures to allow private capital participating in the healthcare sector, as well as foreign capital. So it's promoting also Sino-foreign joint venture hospitals. So we're going to see more private hospitals growing, and hopefully the government is trying to reduce the number of public hospitals and make them more focused on treating complex and comprehensive complex diseases. And in the next couple of slides, we're going to examine the different segments within the healthcare sector. First, let's look at healthcare in general. So in 2016, so last year, China's total import volume in the healthcare sector was $48 billion US. And the USA, Germany, and Japan were still the three largest exporters to China. So in this pie chart, we can see most of the investment coming to China are going to end up in the health products sector, so 80% of the total population. Next, let's examine the pharmaceutical industry in China. In 2016, the total output of the pharmaceutical industry in China in 2016 should be 3,240 billion. And there are 7 key manufacturing or processing areas in the pharmaceutical industries. The 7 areas are raw pharmaceuticals, chemical preparations, Chinese raw herbal products, Chinese proprietary medicine, biomedicine, and sanitary materials. So below, it's a chart of the 7 areas and their revenues. So we can see the largest revenue come from hygienic materials. However, raw materials are growing. The sector of raw material is growing very fast. So the regulatory policies. if a pharmaceutical company is operating in China, it must be very familiar with one authority called the China Food and Drug Administration, so CFDA. CFDA is the most important regulatory authority for pharmaceutical companies in China. So it's responsible for drafting regulations, supervising the implementation, setting out industry standard. Two of the very hot topic in this year in the pharmaceutical industry. First one is the Chinese government is tightening up compliance regulations, especially in terms of bribery. So the government's really deciding to crack down on briberies in pharmaceutical industry. So in 2016, there was a new interpretation from the Supreme Procuratorate and the Supreme Court. So this gives a further explanation of the definition of bribery and the scope of bribery. Also, recently there's new amendments to the Chinese anti-unfair competition law. The new amendments also expanded the scope of briberies. So pharmaceuticals companies operating in China must be very careful with their actions and make sure they don't involve in anything against these regulations. And the other very hot topic recently in the pharmaceutical industry is the evaluation on the quality and efficiency for generic drugs. We know that a lot of the Chinese pharmaceutical companies are producing generic drugs on very low cost, and then so this is seen as a very big threat to multinational companies who spend a lot of money in R&D. So this new procedure, the evaluation on the quality and efficiency of generic drugs, came into being in March 2016. And this procedure aims to evaluate generic drugs' quality and efficacy. Only drugs that pass the evaluation can be promoted as generic drugs. So in the short term, this can be seen as a very good news to multinational companies in China, because this is going to eliminate a lot of the small competitors. But however, in the long term, we think that because the drugs that pass the evaluation can be seen as official substitutes to the original drug, so this can be seen as a threat in the long term. The other very important policy in this year is the two-invoice system that has been introduced to the Chinese healthcare industry by the government. So the two-invoice system are basically saying that only two invoices can be allowed from the process of a drug product or a device product coming out from the factory till they reach their final end user at last. So if only two invoices are allowed, that means only one layer of distribution and only one layer of distributor can be allowed. So this system is really aiming to cut down the layer of distributors and ultimately cut down the final the prices of drug products and medical device products. So in this slide, we're going to examine a little bit the key players in the pharmaceutical industry in China. We know that in 2016, there were more than 7,000 pharmaceutical companies in China, and the vast majority of the 7,000 companies are small-sized Chinese manufacturers. However, if we examine the table on the second half of this slide, we can see that the high-end pharmaceutical market is basically dominated by large Chinese medical groups. So among this top 25 pharmaceutical companies in China, only 6 are multinational groups. In this slide, we're going to talk about the private healthcare institutions, so private hospitals and clinics in China. So as of 2016, there were around 16,000 private hospitals. However, this is still much smaller than demanded. Private hospital only served 10% of population as of 2015. And a lot of the private hospitals are usually not belonging to any of the three-tier system. Usually in China, private hospitals tend to provide better patient environment and improved customer services and longer one-on-one time with the medical staff. But they are more expensive than public hospitals as well. In the 13th five-year plan, the Chinese government is really trying to develop the private healthcare section by simplifying market access for them and lifting restrictions, providing more financial subsidies, and more importantly, allowing healthcare practitioners to work both for public and private institutions at the same time. So these are all very good news for EU SMEs that have a lot of experience in the private healthcare sector and are willing to invest in China. So here we're going to discuss about healthcare IT industry in China, the HIT. The total business transaction in smart health, so smart health means internet-based medical, in 2016 in China was RMB 15.5 billion. And it's growing very fast on a year-on-year increase of 121%. So at the end of 2016, there were nearly 40 internet hospitals that are operating in China. Leading them is the 春雨医生 or 春雨 doctor. 春雨医生 is an online platform that offered consultation to patients. If the patient could upload their history or description of their disease to the platform and pay a little bit of fee, and then they will receive consultation from 春雨医生. However, recently in May 2017, this year, the Chinese government or the National Health and Family Planning Commission, which is the old Ministry of Health, it's coming up with a very strict policy to regulate the online hospitals. It is saying that doctors that are operating in the online hospitals must gain approval from the hospital they are originally employed before they can go and give consultations online. And all the healthcare institutions offering services on the internet must clearly state their service scopes and practice accordingly. So those online hospitals that do not meet the requirements will be shut down immediately. So in the next session, we're going to talk about the rehabilitation service in China. So we know that in Chinese society now, usually three types of people are demanding rehabilitation service. They are either the elderly patients suffering from various diseases, so old people, and or disabled people or patients suffering from chronic diseases. However, the Chinese rehabilitation service is still very much underdeveloped. As of 2016, there were only 24% of the comprehensive hospitals in China that had rehabilitation wards. For example, in 2016, there was a survey that out of every 60 patients in Shanghai that actually required rehabilitation service, only one could be hospitalized to receive the treatment. So in general, there are a lot of opportunities and gaps in the Chinese rehabilitation industry currently. So this also provides a lot of opportunities for EU SMEs that are specialized in this area. It's almost a similar situation for elderly care industry in China. So as we already talked in previous slide, in 2016, there were 230 million people that were above 60. So this was 16% of total population. As of 2015, there were 116 elderly care institutions in China, providing around 30 beds for every 1,000 people. So in 2015, the Ministry of Civil Affairs came up with a policy with the aim to encourage the development of elderly care industry, especially in the private sector. So the new policy calls for more private hospital investment and private capital investment in the elderly care services in terms of catering, providing bathing services, healthcare, housekeeping, creating more elderly care departments, residential areas, and care institutions. So again, this is a clear signal of attracting both the private capital and foreign investment in this industry. We believe this will create a lot of opportunities for USMEs that have experience in this area. I'm going to give this webinar to my colleague Emma, who's more specialized in the healthcare medical device sector.
Hello everyone. In the next section, I would like to introduce the medical device sector overview. As my colleague just introduced, In medical device sector, the China Food and Drug Administration is the administrative and supervisory organization. It is responsible for medical device registration, monitoring issues with medical devices, and records defective medical devices. CFDA also responsible for the drafting of regulations, standards, classification of medical devices. According to the classification rules of medical devices issued by CFDA, in China, medical devices are organized into 3 classes, Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3, which rank devices from low to high risk. Class 1 medical devices has low levels of risk, while Class 3 medical device has high levels of risk. Regarding the medical device registration, some regulations are released recently which demonstrate the progress on medical device approval process. For example, CFDA issued a priority review and approval procedure for the medical devices that categorize as Chinese manufactured Class 3, imported Class 2, and imported Class 3 medical devices. The procedure only be given to high-end medical devices that can meet certain criteria. The CFDA also issued clinical trial exemption catalogs for Class 2 and Class 3 medical devices for 3 times, respectively, in 2014, 2016, and 2017. The medical devices listed on the catalogs will be able to exempt from clinical trial when applying registration. In 2017, a reform on clinical trial administration of drugs and medical devices proposes that overseas clinical trial data for Class 2 medical devices will be accepted if relevant requirements are met. However, the implementation date has not yet been announced. Now let's take a look at medical device registration numbers in 2016. Regarding the total number of applications made to CFDA, 1,612 are initial registration, 5,402 are renewal, and 1,906 are change in license applications. There were 449 initial registration applications in imported Class 2 and 299 imported Class 3 applications. Regarding the total number of registration approvals in 2016, a total of 1,966 initial registration applications were approved. Among them, 593 approvals are for imported Class 2 applications and 444 approvals for imported Class 3 applications. Now let's take a look at market size and performance. In 2016, medical devices sales revenue in China totaled 370 billion RMB with a year-on-year increase of 20%. In 2016, UK was listed among the top 5 imported medical device registration applicants. Registrations from the top 5 countries, the US, Germany, Japan, UK, South Korea, accounted for 73% of the total registration applications in 2016. The total value of imported medical devices in 2016 reached a year-on-year increase of 6.3%. Europe still remained China's largest exporter of medical devices, with a year-on-year increase of 2.6%. Now let's move to the imports and exports of China. In 2016, 45 imported medical devices value exceeded $100 million. The majorities were high-end diagnostic and treatment equipment, which including optical equipment, color ultrasound equipment, X-ray tomographic apparatus, particularly the prepared diagnostic or laboratory reagents. Its imports in 2016 increased by 34.9% year on year, about $1.1 billion. In 2015, import value share was mainly contributed by foreign fund enterprises, which is accounting for 46.6%. Shanghai, remaining the largest market for imported medical devices, its import value of medical device accounted for 44.2% of all medical devices imported to China in 2015. Regarding the exports, the total value of exported medical devices in 2016 reached a year-on-year decrease of 3.1%, a lower growth rate than in 2015. A total of 48 medical devices exceeded an export value of $100 million. The exported medical devices were mainly low-end medical devices, including massage apparatus, glasses, medical casters, surgical dressings, and so on. When we analyzing the key growth drivers of medical device sector, we thought China's deepening medical and healthcare reform, aging population, and growing middle class are the three main factors. As noted earlier, hospitals are categorized into three classes, while the hospitals in each class are subcategorized into three further sub-tiers. We call it Grade 1, Grade 2, and Grade 3. In 2015, China introduced a tiered diagnosis and treatment system, which means different level hospitals deal with different level of diseases. China currently is an aging society. Therefore, heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes diagnosis are increasing. Chronic diseases are predicted to act as a driver for China's medical device market. According to Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, it was estimated that by 2021, about 500 million middle class will be Chinese. The middle class in China are predicted to become the leading consumer group, seeking high-quality healthcare services, including high-quality products, and having access to hospitals which can use high-quality medical devices. In China, domestic manufacturers are growing fast, and the increasingly investing in research and development, achieving breakthroughs in technical barriers and product quality. We also noted that medical device industry clusters were gradually formed along the Yangtze River Delta, the Pearl River Delta, and the Bohai Rim. About 8% of high-end medical device market has been dominated by foreign branded medical devices. The dominant high-end medical devices including CT market, ultrasound equipment market, diagnostic equipment market, and others. Apart from the traditional sales channels such as hospitals, pharmacies, medical device stores, online stores of medical device become innovative and increasingly popular. In 2016, 680 online pharmacies registered are eligible to sell medical devices. The top five types of medical equipment sold through Tmall e-shops in 2016 were blood glucose testing products, wheelchairs, atomizers, and physiotherapy-related products. Hospitals in China are the main buyer of medical devices. For Class 3 hospitals, quality is considered to be the most important factor, especially large medical devices such as CT DSA, and MRI equipment. So Class 3 hospitals tend to have the best equipment or medical devices. For Class 2 and Class 1 hospitals, they are more practical and price conscious when choosing medical devices. In most cases, Class 2 and Class 1 hospitals will choose to prioritize the purchasement of Chinese medical devices, as Chinese government encourage public hospitals to do so. Only when the medical devices that are not available via Chinese brand but vital to the hospital, they tend to purchase imported medical devices. For clinics and community-level medical institutions, they tend to use basic medical devices, which are primarily manufactured by Chinese companies. In China, in the future, we think the supply chain structure will be influenced by the two invoice system if this system expanded to medical device sector. As a matter of fact, this kind of expansion has already happened. In 2016, some Baila provinces announced the implementation of a two invoice system on medical consumables.
So from here, let's examine the recent policy trends that are in both healthcare and medical device sectors in China. So the first very obvious trend recently is the trend of lowering the price. As pharmaceutical and device companies in China may already observe that they are receiving a lot of pressure from the Chinese government to reduce the price of their products. So this pressure comes in both direct and indirect ways. So direct pricing pressure comes from the Chinese government. The very obvious measure they take is in 2015 that there was a document or policy published by the State Council called the Guidance on Improving Public Hospital Drug Central Procurement. This policy mainly emphasizes the central government's intention of furthering reduce the drug procurement prices and improving procurement transparency. Another measurement taken by the government is the Sunshine Procurement Promotion. So Sunshine Procurement is basically an online platform that aims to show all the bidding opportunities, requirements, participants' information on the platform for public review. So by doing this, the government wishes to promote more transparency in the bidding process. Currently, Beijing and Shanghai are implementing this promotion. So the ultimate goal of Sunshine Procurement is to improve transparency and furthermore reduce the procurement price. Companies operating in China may also receive indirect pressure from the government. The very clear signal is the two invoice system initiated by the NHFPC in 2017. So as we mentioned already in the previous slide, the two invoice system aims to reduce the levels of distribution and to reach the final goal of reducing the final price. Another major trend that we observe in the medical device market is that the Chinese government has a strong willingness to open up the medical device market by simplifying the registration procedure and eliminating a lot of the clinical trial procedures for foreign companies. So we can see recently in 2017 there was a new policy that proposed to accept a lot of the clinical trial data from overseas for Class 2 medical devices. And especially it's very obvious that the Chinese government wants to open more the IVD industry. In 2017, there was a new policy that gives a list of 130 more IVD reagents that are exempted from clinical trials. So in the future, we may see that the registration process for IVD products in China are going to speed up very, very soon. So this provides a good opportunity for EU SME companies that are specialized in the IVD sector. One more very obvious trend recently in the recent healthcare reform is the opening up of the private sector. The government is encouraging more private capital to participate in the healthcare sector. So the government expects private healthcare institutions, for example, to compete against the public hospitals to provide basic medical and healthcare services as well as high-end healthcare services. Private institutions are also expected to participate more in rehabilitation and elderly care sectors, complementing the public health sector. So one example we give in the slide is the dentistry. Dentistry in China is a very good example of private capitals participating in healthcare sector. For example, in 2013, revenue of the entire dentistry industry in China was around 3.4 billion pounds. Out of this, half of it, around 1.7 billion pounds, was from the private sector. So the next session, we're going to examine the opportunities and challenges.
In this section, I'm going to introduce the main opportunities of both the healthcare sector and medical device sector. With the above background and analysis, we could identify opportunities in healthcare and medical device sector. For example, the increasing lifestyle diseases provides opportunities for companies dealing with obesity, hypertension, COPD, and other non-communicable diseases. In China's 13th five-year plan, biomedicines and chemical drugs are given priority by Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, which is short for MIIT, in 2016. Another phenomenon is that increasing number of Chinese dental clinics are considering or discussing partnering with international clinics in terms of staff training, telemedicine, and franchising. According to plans of deepening 13th five-year plan, pharmaceutical and healthcare system reform announced by the State Council in 2016, China intends to further separate hospitals and laboratories. This provides opportunities for EU SMEs that have successful experience operating laboratories overseas. EU SMEs may provide the latest technologies, equipment, and ideas on improving services. Healthcare information technology would be another opportunity for companies. For example, the software or application companies, which could help hospitals management, or the companies that are specializing in hospital information technology system operating. Rehabilitation or elderly care services that are used in Europe but are not commonly used in China will have opportunities too. Opportunities in medical device sector could be summarized from 5 aspects. China's tiered diagnosis and treatment system. With the improvement of China's tiered diagnosis and treatment system, grassroots healthcare institutions are expected to garner more attention as patients increasingly visit them for treatment. Thus, the opportunities are there for EU SMEs that could dealing in basic medical devices, diagnostic devices, and home use devices. In China's 13th five-year plan, some medical devices are prioritized, including high-performance medical devices, new materials and surgical dressings, pharmaceutical equipment. In China, online shopping is increasingly growing. According to statistics released by Medical Mall on Tmall, its annual sales of home-use medical equipment in 2016 reached approximately 3 billion RMB. Compared to the traditional pharmaceutical stores, online stores can accumulate a large number of visitors in a short time frame and have lower marketing costs. The most popular medical equipment on online stores including blood pressure monitors, glucose meters, the regulations surrounding online sales for medical devices is currently being drafted by CFDA, which will drive the further development of online sales of medical devices after its implementation. Healthy China 2030 set up several goals to encourage healthier and better lifestyle among Chinese consumers. For example, the mid-term and long-term targets for life expectancy, rate of infant mortality, rate for premature deaths caused by chronic diseases, personal financial contributions as percent of total cost of healthcare were set up in the Health China 2030 targets. In order to achieve the targets above, China also aims to strengthen international opportunity and exchange, which would be beneficial for EU SMEs. In 2016, the Foreign Investment Industry Guidance Catalog and encouraged imported technology and products catalog were drafted by several government authorities of China. Medical devices that's listed in the recent investment and import catalogs indicate the medical products that China will be prioritized during the current 13th five-year plan.
Okay, so I'm going to carry on with the challenges that are in the healthcare and medical device sectors. The first very big challenge that foreign companies may observe in China is the pricing pressure. So we already talked about this in the private slides. We're not going to go into details. The second one also, we already mentioned this in the private slides as well, is the stricter compliance requirements from the Chinese government. So from the new amendments of the anti-unfair competition law and the new announcement from the Supreme Court, we know that any membership fees, accommodation, or transportation fees that are paid to the doctors would be considered as an act of bribery. So foreign companies operating in China should be very careful not to do any actions against these regulations and laws. And the third-party agencies they hire should also offend these regulations. The third challenge we observe is the more fierce local competition. So in the first 13th five-year plan, the Chinese government has a very clear goal to promote the growth and development of local companies in both the pharmaceutical and medical device sectors. State-owned enterprises as well are usually given preferences by local government. For example, in 2017, there's a notice published by the Sichuan provincial government saying that local healthcare institutions should purchase products made by local manufacturers first. If the local products couldn't meet their requirement, then they can go and purchase products made by foreign companies. And at the same time, they need to submit reasons to the government why the local products couldn't meet the requirement. And the third great challenge is the distribution challenge generated by the new two-invoice system. So we've already talked about the two-invoice system. We're not going to go into very details. But usually when foreign companies operate in China, they tend to work with a general distributor who then work with smaller distributors to reach the end users, the hospitals or the physicians. However, under the new two-invoice system, there is only one layer of distributor that could be allowed during the whole distribution process. Then this gives challenges to foreign companies as they sometimes have to work with more than one distributors that could cover different regions in China. So this would add up the operating cost of the foreign companies because then they have to manage multiple distributors at the same time. In the medical device sector, situation is very much the same. The two-invoice system is going to affect the cost structure as well as the distribution structure for foreign companies. And the Chinese government has a lot of support towards local companies. And in the medical device sector, there is also direct downward pricing pressure from the Chinese government. For example, the Sanshan procurement is aiming to directly cut down or reduce the procurement price of medical devices. And also, although we know that the Chinese government is trying to open up the medical device sector by simplifying the registration process or eliminating a lot of the clinical trials, and most of the cases, it could still take up to 1 year for any foreign medical device producers to register their products in China. So 1 year is still quite a long time that a lot of companies may lose their competitive advantage within this 1 year. So we still see that as some kind of barrier for foreign companies operating in China. So the last section are the suggestions that we have for EU SME companies that are either operating in China or willing to enter Chinese market. The first one is the one we always emphasize and could never emphasize enough, is that the companies in China need to pay attention to protect their IP, because sometimes foreign companies in China can still encounter IP infringement, which can cause a lot of the loss for these companies. So it is very important for the companies to register their IP both in your home country and immediately after they enter the Chinese market in China as well. And the second one second suggestion we want to recommend to the companies is to remain up to date with the latest policies. We know that China is going through a lot of healthcare reforms in these recent decades. So the policies might be changing all the time. It is very important for the companies to pay attention to the latest policies in order not to lose their advantage. So here we're giving a list of some of the government authority websites. They're all in English as well. So it's highly encouraged and recommended for the EU SMEs to constantly go visit these websites and for the latest information on the policies. The third suggestion we have is to be innovative. So we know that innovation is usually a very key quality for the EU SMEs. Foreign companies in China usually cannot compete with local companies in terms of price. So it is very important for EU SMEs to focus on innovation and compete with the Chinese companies in terms of innovation. And the fourth suggestion we have is to identify and work with reliable partners. During their adventures in China, the EU SMEs usually need to work with distributors at some point. So these partners usually include distributors or investors or R&D partners. So it is very important to know your partner well. And a small step you can take in order to avoid loss is to do some due diligence. So this can include online searches on your partner, or search your partner's name, company name, or legal representative name against the EIC database. So sometimes a small research can usually save a company from a big fraud. It is encouraged the company either to conduct the due diligence research using a third-party consulting company or law firm, or to have the employees do the research for them. And the fifth suggestion we have is to hire effective agencies. So it is very important to hire agencies during the process or with a purpose for market research or help for registration or applying for license or promoting the products. So it is very important to hire agencies that are familiar with the Chinese policies, and as well as familiar with working with foreign companies in China. And the last piece of suggestion we have is to seek opportunities in niche markets. We know that there are a lot of local companies in China competing with foreign companies, and they have usually the policy preference or government subsidies, and they're very competitive. Also, there are multinational companies that have been operating in China for decades. So in a lot of cases, major or popular markets in China are also very competitive. So then it becomes important for EU SMEs in China to seek opportunities in niche markets or markets that are not discovered yet. and to seize opportunities and act on time. So this brings us to the end of this webinar. It is our great pleasure to give the webinar to you. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact either the EU SME Centre or to the CBBC, and we'll be happy to provide any answers we have.